She didn't mean for anyone to hear it. Just a quiet lunch on a gray Monday, a woman stirring her salad, whispering to her friend that she was 38 and still waiting not for perfection, but for something that meant something. Through the half-open door of the conference room beside her, a man who'd forgotten how to feel, a man who built empires instead of memories, stopped breathing for the first time in years. That's how it began, with one confession meant for no one, and one listener who was never supposed to hear. A story about the courage it takes to stay true to yourself in a world that rewards pretending. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let S begin. The clink of a spoon against porcelain echoed through the near-empty caf, the kind of small sound that filled the spaces people left between words. Outside, the city hummed beneath a pale winter sky, cars sliding past on wet asphalt, light glancing off their roofs like small waves. Inside, harbor and grain. The smell of roasted coffee and fresh rye bread hung in the air, warm and steady, like a memory refusing to fade. At the corner table, Evelyn Whitman sat with her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. The late lunch crowd had thinned to just a few people, an older couple by the window, a barista humming softly behind the counter, and her friend Mara, who had been talking nonstop about a new book club she wanted to start. But Evie hadn't heard a word in minutes. "Evie, you're not even pretending to listen," Mara said finally, smiling in the way only an old friend could, half exasperation, half affection. "You're somewhere else." Evie blinked, her gaze unfocused. "Sorry. Just a day." She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Her hair, the color of honey in low light, slipped forward as she lowered her head. "I didn't sleep much." Mara set down her fork and leaned forward, elbows on the table. "All right, spill it." "What is going on?" Evie hesitated. She glanced around. The caf was quiet now. Just the hum of the espresso machine and the low murmur of a man's voice somewhere behind the frosted glass partition that separated the caf from a small conference room. She lowered her voice anyway. "Promise you won, judge me. Since when have I ever?" Mara tilted her head. Curious now. Evie exhaled, her breath trembling just slightly. "It is stupid. Probably. Try me." "I am 38, Evie said at last, "and I've never been with anyone." The words slipped out and seemed to hang in the air between them, fragile and echoing. She watched Mara's expression carefully, ready for shock or pity, or one of those well-meant reassurances that always rang hollow. But her friend just blinked once, softly, and said, "Okay." That's it. Evie tried to laugh again, embarrassed. No gasp of horror. Mara shrugged gently. "Why would I gasp? It's not a contest. Honey, it's your life." Evie looked down at her hands. "It's just everyone else seems to have figured it out. Relationships, passion, heartbreak, all of it. I've had dates, sure. But when things start to get serious, I freeze. It feels wrong, like my heart wants one thing, and my body is still waiting for a reason to trust." Mara reached across the table, covering her friend's hand. "Maybe you were waiting for something real. Maybe," Evie murmured, "or maybe I am just broken in some way." "Evie," Mara's tone was steady. "You were not broken. You just refuse to settle. That is not a flaw that's rare." The words found her softly, like sunlight slipping through a crack in heavy curtains. For a moment, Evie let herself believe them. Then she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't know. Some nights it feels like waiting for something that doesn't exist." Behind the glass wall, in the small rented conference space, Daniel Royce had been reviewing a contract for an acquisition, one of a dozen meetings that day. He had come here precisely because it was quiet, or so he'd thought. He heard the first part of the conversation by accident, the lilt of a woman's voice carrying through a door that didn't quite latch. He should have shut it. He almost did. But when she said, "I am 38, and I've never," his hand froze on the page. Something in her voice steady, trembling. brave cut through the gray noise of his world like a single, clear note. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the pen idle in his fingers. He couldn't see her, only a sliver of light from the caf through the half-open door. But he found himself listening to every word. She wasn't ashamed, not really. The tone wasn't confession, it was ache. The ache of someone who had lived responsibly, kindly, maybe even invisibly, and was suddenly unsure if that had cost her too much. Daniel stared at the contract before him, the neat rows of numbers and clauses blurring together. He had built his company on precision, on control. At 46, he was a man who scheduled every minute, who believed that feelings were for people who had time to waste. And yet now, through a door left an eighth of an inch ajar, he was listening to a woman rediscover her own heart. He heard Mara say, "When the right person comes, you will know, and when you do, he'll see you for who you are, not what you give him." Evie's voice wavered. What if he never comes? Daniel S. hand tightened around his pen. He had asked himself the same question for years, though for different reasons. What if love was a door that had already closed for good? The sound of a chair scraping broke the thought, Evie standing, gathering her coat. "I should get back," she said. "Quarterly reports, Don, to write themselves." Mara smiled, squeezing her arm. "One day, you'll have better things to do on your lunch break." When the caf door chimed behind them, Daniel sat still for a long moment. The silence that followed felt louder than any noise. He reached for the door handle, intending to shut it completely this time, to do the right thing, end the strange intrusion. But his hand hesitated. The air still carried the faint scent of coffee and something floral lavender, maybe from the other room. He closed his eyes, hearing her voice one last time in his mind. "I want it to mean something." The door stayed open, just slightly, enough for the light to spill through. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office before sunrise, as he often did. The skyline outside his window was still half asleep, the lights of downtown Chicago reflecting off Lake Michigan like tiny trembling stars. Inside his office, everything was in order, precisely the way he needed it to be. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, strong enough to wake the dead, and stared at the day's schedule glowing on his tablet. Meetings from 8 until 6, strategy calls, an investor luncheon, a finance review, every block of time accounted for, nothing unexpected, nothing human. And yet, as he scrolled, a name tugged at him from the employee directory, Evelyn Whitman, senior research analyst. He had never truly noticed it before, though he must have seen it 100 times on reports and memos. Now, it seemed to hum beneath the text, as though her name itself carried a pulse. He set the tablet down and rubbed his temple. "Ridiculous," he muttered. He didn't have time for distractions, least of all the kind that made men forget how to think clearly. Daniel Royce had built his empire from the ground up, a decade of 12-hour days, business flights that blurred time zones, boardroom wars fought behind calm eyes. He'd been called efficient, brilliant, even ruthless, all accurate. But no one had ever called him warm, and he liked it that way. At least, he used to. 10 years earlier, when his wife, Julia, passed away after a sudden illness, Daniel had promised himself that grief would not destroy him, so he did what he did best. He organized it, compartmentalized it, buried it under numbers and schedules until the pain stopped knocking. Only sometimes, in the quiet hours, when the city held its breath before dawn, he still caught himself turning toward the sound of a laugh that wasn't there. And now, out of nowhere, a stranger-esque voice from a caf wall away had cracked the seal around that silence. He'd spent most of the night thinking about it, the calm way she'd spoken, the slight tremor on the words. I want it to mean something. It wasn't what she said that unsettled him. It was that she said it like a truth she was willing to live by. Daniel had met thousands of people in his career, most of them fluent in performance. But that voice, it hadn't been performing. At 8:47, he walked into the glass-walled bullpen of the analytics department, hands in his pockets, pretending to review the digital dashboards that scrolled across the big monitors. He told himself he was just checking on progress. But there she was, Evie Whitmanhead, bent over a report, a strand of hair falling loose from her bun. Her workspace was orderly, but not sterile. A small plant leaning toward the light. A mug that read, "Data tells the truth." A photo of an older woman smiling, probably her mother. Evie was talking softly with another analyst about regression models, her voice even, her gestures measured. There was no trace of the woman from the caf who'd whispered secrets into the air, only quiet focus. He realized, watching her, that he'd built an entire company around people like her, steady, competent, reliable, and somehow never seen them as human beings with lives beyond their screens. When she looked up briefly and their eyes almost met across the open floor, Daniel turned away too quickly. The gesture felt almost adolescent. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head at himself. Back in his office, he opened his laptop and clicked on her Department S latest project folder. There it was, again her name, in the metadata. A digital footprint of dedication reports uploaded at midnight. Clean models, careful notes. He admired her precision, the lack of self-promotion. For a brief, dangerous moment, he considered sending her a message, something professional but kind, an acknowledgement of good work, maybe even a compliment on her presentation clarity. He opened a new chat window. His fingers hovered above the keys. Ms. Whitman, I reviewed your analytics summary this morning. Excellent. He stopped. The line felt wrong, too personal for a CEO to send directly, too revealing of his sudden awareness. He could already imagine HR's polite caution, the murmurs of favoritism, the gossip that always seemed to fill quiet corners. He closed the window without sending, but curiosity didn't fade. It shifted into observation. Over the next few days, he noticed details he shouldn't have. The way Evie always brought her own lunch, eaten quickly while reading a book at her desk. The way she listened more than she spoke in meetings. But when she did, her words carried weight. The way she never laughed too loudly, but smiled with her eyes when someone else did. She carried silence like a kind of grace. One evening, as the office lights dimmed and the others trickled out, Daniel passed by her floor again, through the glass. He saw her still working, fingers steady on the keyboard, lips moving slightly as she read a line of data aloud to herself. He felt something stir, a quiet admiration tinged with the ache of recognition. He had once known someone who loved like that, who worked with that same mix of diligence and faith. Julia had believed in doing things the right way, even when it took longer, even when no one noticed. And now, a decade later, here was another woman choosing the same kind of quiet integrity in a world that rewarded noise. That night, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking the lake. The city lights shimmered below, reflected in the wine glass he hadn't touched. He picked up his phone, opened the company directory app again, and scrolled to her name. He typed, "Do you ever get tired of holding the world together while everyone else sleeps?" He stared at the words. They were true, but also invasive, not the kind of thing a man in his position should ever send. His thumb hovered over send. Then he pressed delete. The message vanished, leaving only the faint glow of the screen and his reflection staring back. A man disciplined enough to build an empire, yet suddenly unsure how to build a bridge across 12 feet of open air and a single misaligned door. He set the phone face down and leaned back, eyes closing, the sound of her voice echoing once more in his mind. I want it to mean something. The sentence stayed with him like a chord, still vibrating long after the piano key was struck soft, persistent, impossible to forget. It was nearly 7:30 in the evening when the message arrived. To Evelyn Whitman, from Daniel Royce. Subject quarterly, data correction. Ms. Whitman, IV noticed a few inconsistencies in the Q4 report and would appreciate your clarification in person. Could you spare 15 minutes tomorrow morning? My office, 9:08 D. Royce Evie read it twice, her stomach twisting. In 5 years at Royce Analytics, She'd had minimal direct contact with the CEO once during an all-hands meeting, and another time when he passed her in the elevator without noticing her at all. He was one of those men whose presence seemed to tilt the air around him distant, precise, efficient, the kind of man people admired from afar but avoided up close. She stared at the screen, then exhaled. "It's just work," she whispered to herself. Still, she double-checked every cell in her spreadsheet before shutting down her laptop for the night. The next morning, Chicago woke under a pale stretch of early light. The streets shimmered with last night's rain, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and ozone. Evie arrived 15 minutes early, heart ticking faster than her heels on the marble floor. Daniel's assistant greeted her politely and gestured toward the door. "He's expecting you." When Evie stepped inside, she was struck first by the quiet. The office was large but not ostentatious floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A grand walnut desk, and behind it, shelves lined not just with business awards, but books, old books, classics, biographies, spines cracked from use. Daniel stood by the window, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Morning light framed him in soft silver. He turned when he heard the door close and smiled faintly. Not the polite kind used for clients, but something gentler, more human. "Ms. Whitman, thank you for coming up." "Of course, Mr. Royce." Her voice betrayed the slightest tremor, which she prayed he didn't notice. He gestured not toward the imposing desk, but to a small round table near the window, a place for coffee, not contracts. "Let's sit here, less formal." Evie hesitated for half a second, then took the chair opposite him. Her tablet rested in her lap like a shield. He opened a folder, scanning a printed sheet. In the revenue variance column, there is a missing subset. "I thought it best to ask you directly, rather than through 5 layers of email." Her relief at hearing a purely professional question made her smile. Yes, that as a dataset still waiting on vendor confirmation. I should have noted it more clearly. "I appreciate the thoroughness," he said, and his eyes lifted briefly to hers. "Your reports are clean." They read like someone who actually enjoys precision. Evie tilted her head, uncertain whether it was praise or small talk. "I suppose numbers are honest. They don't pretend." Daniel's mouth curved slightly. "Ivy said that myself more than once." Something softened in the air, then small, like the flicker of a candle that didn't quite catch. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with quiet curiosity. "Do you always get here this early?" She blinked. "Most days. I like the quiet before everyone else logs on. Easier to think." "I understand that," he said. "I run along the lake most mornings for the same reason." "You run?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Somehow, she hadn't pictured this man tailored, meticulous as someone who did anything unplanned or messy like jogging. 5 miles, give or take, he replied. "Though lately, I suspect the lake is faster than I am." The joke caught her off guard. She laughed a small, genuine sound, and Daniel looked almost startled by it. For a few seconds, the city noise below filled the silence between them. Then Evie's professionalism reasserted itself. She straightened her posture, trying to rebuild the distance she felt dissolving. "If there is nothing else about the report, I should get back to the department. We are closing out reconciliations this week." Daniel hesitated, as if weighing something. "Actually," he said, "theirs is one more thing." Evie looked up, uncertain. He closed the folder gently, folding his hands on the table. "You've been with us for what? 5 years now." 6, next month. 6, he repeated, nodding. "That's a long time to stay steady in one place these days." "Most analysts rotate out after 2. I like the work," she said simply, "and stability." "Nothing wrong with that," he said, his voice quieter now. "In a world that keeps chasing the next big thing, I admire people who still believe in building something slow." Evie frowned, caught between gratitude and confusion. "Mr. Royce," she began carefully, "if this is about my position or my performance," he lifted a hand, shaking his head. No, not at all. This isn't a performance talk. I just realized I know almost nothing about the people who make this company run. I am trying to change that. For a moment, Evie studied him. There was something unfamiliar in his tone, not condescension, not charm, just quiet interest. But that made it more dangerous somehow. With respect, she said gently, you don't have to know me. You just have to know my work, and I prefer to keep it that way. Her words hung there, firm but polite. Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled slightly, almost approvingly. Work first, he said. Understood. He rose, gathering his papers, signaling the meeting's end. Thank you. Ms. Whitman, I appreciate your time. He could have said Evie. Many men would have, but he didn't. The use of her last name felt deliberate, professional, respectful, safe. Evie stood as well, uncertain why that single choice of address felt like a kindness. Of course, Mr. Royce. He held the door for her as she left. The scent of cedar and rain lingered faintly in the air. When she stepped into the hallway, her pulse was still too fast. Though nothing about the meeting had been improper, it had been about data, numbers, and columns. And yet, when the elevator doors closed, she realized her hands were trembling. Back in his office, Daniel sat again at the small table, fingers tracing the faint circle her coffee cup had left on the wood. He looked at the mark for a long time, then quietly smiled, half at her, half at himself. Some impressions, he thought, weren't meant to be wiped away. On Monday morning, the office felt softer than usual. Maybe it was the gray drizzle outside, or the faint hum of the espresso machine down the hall, or maybe it was something Evie couldn't name. When she reached her desk, the first thing she noticed was sent the blinking cursor on her monitor. It was the small parcel sitting neatly beside her keyboard. It was wrapped exactly. Just brown paper folded with care, tied with twine, no tag, no note. Evie looked around. The floor was still half empty. Only a few early risers hunched over laptops, the faint glow of their screens reflecting in their glasses. She untied the string. Inside lay a worn paperback copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Its spine was fragile, edges soft from age. She opened it carefully, and a sticky note slipped out, landing face up on her desk. For the faithful heart, that was all it said. She blinked at it for a long moment, the words blurring slightly as a mix of confusion and warmth spread through her. It was her favorite book, a story she'd once mentioned in passing during a staff retreat, years ago, when they'd been talking about formative childhood reads. She couldn't imagine who had remembered. Her first instinct was to smile. The second was to look over her shoulder. The glass office partitions reflected too many faces for her to tell. She scanned the bullpen, but no one seemed to be paying her any attention. Evie slipped the note back inside the cover and closed the book. "Good morning," came a voice behind her. She turned quickly. It was Mara, coat draped over one arm, coffee in the other, eyebrows already arched. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Evie hesitated. Not a ghost. A book. Scandalous. Mara deadpanned. "Do tell." Evie held it out. "Someone left it on my desk." Mara leaned in, reading the note aloud. "For the faithful heart." Huh. Poetic. "So, which secret admirer quotes Brooklyn to win your affection?" "I have no idea," Evie said. "Maybe it is a thank you from the library committee or something." Mara sipped her coffee, unconvinced. "Library committee doesn't tie twine this neatly." "You sure it was not from Mara?" Evie's tone carried a warning, though her pulse stuttered. "Don T. Start." Mara raised her hands in mock surrender. "Fine. I am just saying ever since you met with the big boss, you've had this mysterious glow." Evie rolled her eyes. "It was one meeting about data." "Uh-huh. I am serious. I know you are," Mara said softly, setting her coffee down. "Which is exactly why you need to be careful. Men in power, noticing women who don't want to be noticed, it's a fine line." Evie looked back at the book, tracing the faded title with her thumb. "I know, but this doesn't feel wrong. It feels thoughtful. Until it s not, Mara replied. Promise me you will keep your head clear. Evie nodded, though part of her wanted to cling to the warmth that the gesture sparked. It had been a long time since anyone had done something gentle for her. By mid-morning, the book sat in the corner of her desk, catching stray glances from coworkers, but no comments. She returned to her spreadsheets, the familiar rhythm of numbers calming her thoughts. At exactly 8:05 the next day, she arrived to find another surprise. A cup of cappuccino waited beside her keyboard. Not from the machine downstairs, the foam was real, the scent of cinnamon faint but unmistakable. Her name wasn't written on the lid, but one sip told her everything. 2 teaspoons of sugar, just the way she liked it. She froze mid-step. Someone knew. Evie looked toward the corridor that led to the executive floor. The light caught the glass office at the end of the hall, reflecting sky and city. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a shadow move inside, tall, deliberate, but when she blinked, the space was empty. Mara appeared moments later, setting her bag down. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Is that..." Evie sighed. "Apparently," Mara grinned. "You can say it. You were living in a slow-burn office romance novel." "It is not funny," Evie said, but there was a hint of laughter under her breath. "It's a little funny," Mara countered, stealing a whiff of the cappuccino. Cinnamon, he-s either attentive or a mind reader. Evie frowned. Come on. You think the intern from marketing knows your coffee ratio. That's exactly the problem, Evie said quietly. I don't want to assume, or worse, encourage something that isn't professional. Mara leaned on the edge of her desk. Maybe it is innocent. Maybe it is admiration. Or maybe, she said, tilting her head, someone finally sees you. Evie. The words landed heavier than Mara probably intended, because part of her, some small, reckless part, wanted that to be true. She thought about the way Daniel had said Ms. Whitman the other day, the warmth that softened his otherwise careful tone. But he couldn't possibly be behind this. Could he? Evie picked up the cup, staring at the foam heart that had begun to collapse. The smell of cinnamon filled the air. It was too perfect, too personal. Mara watched her closely. You're thinking about taking a sip, aren't you? Evie set it down gently. I'm thinking about boundaries. That sounds exactly like something you'd say right before ignoring them. Evie smiled faintly. Maybe, but not today. At noon, while most of the department was out for lunch, she walked the cup to the break room and placed it neatly by the sink. The lid still on, untouched. She stared at it for a moment, the white foam heart melting behind the plastic. Then she whispered to herself, if it is meant to mean something, it'll wait. Back at her desk, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and restraint. She reached for her book again, opening it to the note tucked inside. For the faithful heart, Evie smiled sadly. Faithful, she murmured, not foolish. Outside, the drizzle turned to soft snow, and somewhere 2 floors above, in an office with a view of the lake, Daniel paused mid-email, glancing toward the hall as if he could heard someone say his name. But there was only silence. Daniel didn't sleep much that week. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face across the small table in his office, the way she looked startled but unafraid, steady even under his gaze. And then he saw the cup on her desk the next morning, untouched, but left there long enough to make a statement. It wasn't rejection, exactly. It was something harder, a reminder, a line. He respected that, maybe even admired it more than he wanted to admit. But admiration didn't cancel responsibility. And Daniel Royce had built his entire empire on a single principle: you take care of what you build, especially the people who trust you enough to work for you. By Friday, he'd made his decision. He walked into the Human Resources Department without warning, startling Clara Jensen, the HR director, who nearly spilled her coffee. Mr. Royce, she said, standing up quickly. Was this meeting on the calendar? No, Daniel replied. And it doesn't need to be. I just need 15 minutes. Privately, Clara gestured to a conference room, closing the door behind them. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the window, watching sleet streak the glass. "I need a new clause added to the employee conduct handbook," he said, his tone brisk but not unkind. Clara opened her notebook. "Of course. May I ask what kind of clause?" Daniel hesitated, his hand tightening around the pen in his pocket. "A clarification regarding personal relationships within the company," he said, "particularly those involving senior leadership." Clara looked up, eyebrows raised. "We already have a policy in place, sir." "It prohibits any relationship that could create a conflict of interest." "Then expand it," Daniel said. "Make it specific. If any personal relationship arises between leadership and a subordinate, it must be disclosed immediately. And if that happens, reporting lines must change before any contact outside of work continues." Clara blinked. "That's very specific. Should I assume this is preventative or responsive?" Daniel's jaw flexed. "Preventative," he said evenly. Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I will draft something and send it over for review." "I will draft it," Daniel said quietly. "You all edit." She understood then that this wasn't a hypothetical exercise. It was personal, even if he wouldn't admit it. For the next 2 hours, Daniel sat in Clara's small office, typing the words himself, every sentence measured, every clause clear. He built the policy like he built everything else in his life to remove temptation from the equation. If a senior executive finds themselves in a position of personal interest toward an employee within their reporting structure, immediate disclosure must occur. A reassignment of oversight will precede any contact outside of business-related interaction. No exceptions. It read cold, almost legalistic. But to Daniel, it was a promise. When the final version printed, he signed it at the bottom and handed it to Clara. "Distribute it to the leadership team by Monday morning," he said, "and I want acknowledgement signatures from all department heads." Clara glanced up. "Including yourself, especially myself?" He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Clara," he said, softer now, "if you hear any questions about the reason behind it, tell them it's about fairness. Tell them it's about doing things right." After he left, Clara sat back in her chair, staring at the signed paper. There was something both noble and lonely in his handwriting, neat, deliberate, almost weary. By Monday morning, the memo had gone out to all executives. A few raised eyebrows, some exchanged knowing glances, but no one questioned it aloud. When Evie passed the HR bulletin board that day, she noticed a new document posted under policy updates. She read the title, Workplace Relationship Disclosure and Conduct Clarification, and felt a faint tightening in her chest. She skimmed the first paragraph, understanding immediately who had written it. No one else in this building would phrase things with such clinical precision, yet still leave room for mercy. Her pulse quickened, though she couldn't have said why. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was gratitude. He was setting boundaries where she'd been afraid to. That afternoon, Daniel called a short leadership meeting in the glass boardroom overlooking the city. He stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back. "I trust you've all read the new clause," he said. "It is effective immediately. This isn't a restriction, it is protection, for the company and for our people." No one spoke, but a few nodded. Daniel continued, "Our work culture is built on respect. I expect every leader in this room to uphold that standard, even when it is inconvenient." When the meeting ended, he didn't linger. He walked the hall quietly, papers tucked under his arm, until he reached the small conference room near the caf downstairs. The same one, the same door, still misaligned, still leaving that narrow strip of air between inside and out. He hadn't been there since that day, since her voice had slipped through the crack and unsettled the world he thought was finished growing. Daniel stared at the door for a long moment. The hinges squeaked slightly when he pushed it open, revealing the same small table, the faint scent of stale coffee. He stepped inside. The sound of the city outside felt distant, softened by the hum of the HVAC and the ticking of the clock on the wall. He reached up, testing the alignment of the latch. It was still loose. He took a screwdriver from the maintenance cart in the hall and tightened the screw until the frame met perfectly. The click clean and final. The sound echoed in the empty room, simple, decisive. When he stepped back, the door closed all the way. He stood there a moment longer, hand resting on the handle, as if sealing more than wood and air sealing temptation, regret, the ache of wanting something he wasn't ready to claim. Then, finally, he let go. Outside, the snow had stopped, the city shimmered with new light, and Daniel walked back toward the elevators, the faintest trace of a smile on his face. He had done the right thing, for her, for himself, for the kind of man he still wanted to be. But as the elevator doors closed, he caught his reflection in the polished steel, a man standing exactly where he should be. And yet, for the first time in years, part of him quietly wished he wasn't. The announcement came on a Wednesday morning, delivered with the kind of corporate enthusiasm that made Evie's stomach tighten. The email subject line read, "Welcome our new executive vice president, strategic operations, Colton Hale." By noon, the entire building had seen his photo, a confident man with a perfect smile and eyes that looked like they'd never once lost sleep over anything. The official memo described him as a seasoned leader with a strong record of cross-departmental success. To Evie, it read like a storm warning disguised as sunshine. He arrived in person 2 days later, his tailored suit the color of midnight, shoes that gleamed like mirrors. His handshake lingered half a second too long. His compliments rehearsed, but polished enough to seem sincere. "Evelyn Whitman," he said when they were introduced. "I've heard about your reports. Impressive work. No wonder, Daniel, Mr. Royce keeps your department on a short leash." Evie smiled politely. "We all try to keep things running smoothly." Colton chuckled. "And modest, too. That's rare these days." The conversation was brief, but the way he said Daniel's name carried something an unspoken familiarity. The tone of a man already positioning himself as an equal. It set Evie's teeth on edge. By mid-afternoon, Colton had begun making rounds, introducing himself to every team. He moved through the space like he owned it, all confidence and charisma. When he stopped by Evie's desk, he leaned against the partition, too close, smelling faintly of cedar and cologne. "So," he said, eyes sweeping across her screen, "you're the numbers whisperer I keep hearing about." "I analyze data," she replied, not looking up. "Ah, humble and mysterious," he teased. Dangerous combination. Evie forced a smile, hoping he'd to move on. Instead, his hand brushed the back of her chair as he leaned in, just enough to make her spine stiffen. "Tell me," he continued, "how does one stay sane working for a perfectionist like Daniel Royce?" Her fingers froze above the keyboard. "He's fair," she said simply. "Fair," Colton repeated, smiling as though he'd just heard a riddle. "That is one word for him?" The air felt suddenly heavy, and Evie shifted her chair an inch forward, putting distance between them. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Hale?" He grinned. "Just saying hello? Donna be so serious. Evelyn, I am not here to bite." When he finally walked away, the smell of his cologne lingered like something invasive. Evie stared at her screen, the numbers swimming slightly before her eyes. Across the room, Daniel had seen the entire exchange from behind the glass wall of his office. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even frown. He just stood there, one hand braced against the window, watching the way Colton leaned in too far, the way Evie's posture tightened. His instinct was immediate and primal to step out, to say something, to draw a line, but instinct was not policy, and Daniel Royce had written that policy himself. So, instead, he took a slow breath, turned from the glass, and called Clara Jensen from HR. "Clara," he said, voice steady, "make sure all department heads attend next week's ethics refresh session. No exceptions." He hung up before she could ask why. For the rest of the day, Daniel forced himself into routine emails, investor calls, the hum of strategy meetings, But every time he walked past the analytics department, his eyes found Evie, calm and focused, pretending nothing had happened. And every time, he found Colton nearby, hovering, laughing too loudly, leaving the faint ripple of discomfort behind him. Late that evening, when most of the office had emptied, Evie was still at her desk, headphones in, double-checking projections. Colton appeared again, casual now, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. "Still here?" he asked, leaning against her cubicle wall. She pulled off her headphones, startled. "Just finishing a few things. Dedication." "I like that," he said. "Listen, a few of us are heading to Iron and Oak after work celebrating the quarter S close. You should come. First round S on me." Evie shook her head. "Thank you, but I've got plans." "Come on," he said, grin widening. "It's, Friday. Live a little. Really? I can do—" Colton studied her for a moment, then tilted his head. "You always this serious, Whitman? Or do you just save the fun for select company?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't mix work and drinking? Mr. Hale? That is twice you've called me Mr. Hale. Makes me feel old." "Then maybe take the hint, for a second." The charm in his face flickered just enough for her to see what lived beneath it. Then he laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. All right. Message received. But you will change your mind eventually. Everyone does." She didn't reply. When he finally left, she exhaled, only then realizing how long she'd been holding her breath. She gathered her things and turned off her monitor. As she walked toward the elevator, she saw movement through the glass wall of Daniel S.'s office. He was still there, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on a spreadsheet that probably didn't need his attention. For an instant, their eyes met through the reflection in the glass. She gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of something neither of them could name. He nodded back, nothing more. But the look in his eyes wasn't corporate. It was protective and restrained. When she reached the ground floor, the cool night air hit her face, sharp and bracing. Chicago S-light stretched out before her, endless and indifferent. She stood there a moment, letting the wind clear her head. Back upstairs. Daniel turned off his computer. He sat for a long time in the dark, the city glittering beyond the window. On the desk before him lay a draft of next week's agenda, quarterly results, investor relations, employee engagement. He added one more line at the bottom: review leadership behavioral standards, ensure safety across departments. Then he set his pen down and leaned back, jaw tight. For years, he'd prided himself on logic over impulse, but logic didn't still the image burned behind his eyes. Colton S. hand on the back of her chair, her small, silent flinch. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly until the pulse in his throat steadied. Boundaries, he reminded himself. You wrote them for a reason. Still, when he left the building, his reflection in the elevator glass looked back at him with something close to envy, a feeling he had thought himself too disciplined to feel anymore. The fluorescent lights on the 6th floor flickered again, a faint buzz, a pulse, a sigh. Evie rubbed her temples, squinting at the document in her hands. The archive room smelled faintly of cardboard and dust, the air stale from years of paper breathing in the dark. It was late, past 7. Most of the building was empty except for the cleaning staff and a handful of managers finishing reports before the quarterly meeting. She was there to find one of last year's audit files, a task no one wanted, which made it perfect for her. Quiet, methodical work. She balanced on the small step stool, reaching for a box labeled Finance 2020, Q3, when the door creaked open behind her. Working late, Colton S. voice slid through the silence, smooth and careless. Evie froze. Just finishing something up. Dedicated, he said. His tone was light, but the way he lingered in the doorway felt deliberate. That S, admirable. I want to be long, she said, stepping down from the stool, careful to keep her movement steady. Take your time, Colton replied, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch was soft, but it landed like a thunderclap in the narrow room. Evie turned. The overhead light flickered once more, casting a thin strobe over the rows of storage shelves. Was there something you needed just checking in? He said. You've been avoiding me. Her grip tightened on the folder in her hands. I've you been working? He stepped closer, weaving between the stacks. That one way to put it. Mr. Hale, she said evenly. I'd like to finish this in peace. He smiled, taking another step. Relax. Evie, I am not here to cause trouble. I thought we could talk, maybe smooth over whatever misunderstanding we had. There is no misunderstanding, she said, backing slightly as he moved closer. I'm not interested. The smile thinned. You don't have to be rude. I am being clear, she said, heart pounding. Please step back. He stopped, then tilted his head, as if amused. You always this tense. You might enjoy life more if you stopped being afraid of it. She took another step back, her heel brushed against a stack of boxes. Mr. Hale, I said step back. This time, his smirk widened. You know, it is funny. I've seen the way Royce looks at you. You play the part, the quiet, untouchable one. But I think you like the attention more than you admit. Her throat went dry. You're out of line. He shrugged, closing the last few feet between them. Maybe. Or maybe I just see you for who you really are. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into half-darkness. Evie's pulse roared in her ears. And then, from the hallway, a door opened, Miss Whitman Daniel's voice steady, low, unmistakable. Colton turned sharply. Daniel stood in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, his expression calm in the way that meant danger. I was tracing a maintenance ticket, Daniel said, eyes shifting from the trembling light above to the narrow space between them. Didn't expect to find company. Colton's smile returned, brittle now, just checking on one of my analysts. Daniel's tone didn't change. Step away from her. Mr. Hale, excuse me. You heard me. The silence stretched, heavy enough to press the air flat. Colton chuckled once, trying to recover his charm. This isn't what it looks like. Daniel stepped forward, closing the space until the overhead light caught the hard edge of his jaw. I am certain it is not, because what it looks like is an executive cornering an employee in a closed room. Color drained from Colton's face. You're overreacting. Then you wouldn't mind waiting here until HR arrives to confirm that, Daniel said, pulling his phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen once, his tone unchanged. Clara, 6th floor, archive room, now. Colton turned toward Evie, as if seeking validation. Tell him. Evelyn, we were just talking. Evie's voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. You wouldn't move when I asked you to. Something cracked in the silence, then not the light, not a sound, but the pretense that had filled the room. Colton's jaw tightened. You've got this wrong, he muttered, brushing past Daniel toward the door. Daniel didn't move aside. Wait. Colton stopped, face inches from his. What you'll leave when I say you can? For a man who rarely raised his voice. The quiet authority in Daniel's words landed like thunder. He held Colton's gaze a second longer, then stepped back, giving him the space to go. When the door opened, the hallway light flooded in, bright and clean. Clara arrived seconds later, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the room. Mr. Royce incident, he said. Document it. Colton muttered something under his breath, half protest, half retreat. But Clara's expression warned him to think better of it. She escorted him out, heels clicking down the corridor until the sound faded. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint buzz of the light, still unsteady above them. Daniel turned to Evie. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly around the folder. He didn't. I am fine. Daniel's voice softened. No one should ever make you feel unsafe here. Not for a second. Evie met his eyes then, and something in his face, the restrained anger. The quiet care made her chest tighten. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small. He reached up, adjusting the light switch, and the flicker stopped. You should go home, he said gently. I'll handle the rest. As she stepped past him, the faintest brush of air between them carried the smell of paper and cologne and something like steadiness. "Daniel," she said quietly, almost against her better judgment. He paused. "Thank you." He inclined his head once. "Always." She left the room, footsteps echoing softly down the hall. Daniel stood alone for a while, looking at the closed door. His pulse still thrummed, his jaw still tight, but beneath it all was something deeper, not anger, not relief, but the quiet terror of what he almost lost before he ever had it. He reached up and flicked the light switch once more. The bulb held steady this time. The room was silent, but the silence was different now, heavier, alive, waiting. The rooftop terrace above Roy's tower was mostly empty that night. Chicago's skyline glittered like glass scattered across velvet, and the wind carried the faint salt scent of the lake. Along the railing, a string of golden lights swayed in the breeze leftovers from the company's summer reception months ago, still clinging to their quiet duty to soften steel and sky. Evie hadn't planned to be there. She'd gone up simply to breathe, to shake the echo of the archive room from her bones, to let the cold remind her that she was safe again. She hadn't expected Daniel to follow. He stepped out through the service door, hands in his coat pockets, his silhouette framed by the glow of the city below. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "You didn't," she replied, though her heart stuttered once. "I just needed air. I know." He joined her by the railing, leaving a careful 2 feet of space between them. The wind caught his hair, loosened the composed edges of the man she'd always seen in boardrooms and meetings. Tonight, he looked human tired, thoughtful, almost vulnerable. They stood in silence for a long while, the kind that feels more like waiting than avoidance. Then Daniel exhaled and spoke. "Evie, I owe you an apology." Her brow furrowed. "For what happened with Colton. You already handled that." He shook his head. "That's not what I mean." He turned slightly, meeting her eyes. The string lights flickered between them. "I am talking about something that happened long before tonight. Something you don't know I did." Evie's breath caught, but she said nothing. Daniel looked out over the city, jaw tight as if forcing himself to stay still. "A few months ago, that day at Harbor and Grain, the cafe by the lobby you were having lunch with your friend, Sophie Mara," Evie corrected softly. "Mara," he repeated. "You were sitting near the glass partition, and I was in the conference room next to it. The door latch was misaligned. I didn't know at first. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop." His voice trembled slightly on that word eavesdrop, like it physically hurt to admit. "But I heard you," he continued. "Not everything. Just enough to understand that you were sharing something private. Something you never meant for anyone else to hear." The city noise seemed to fade around them, cars, wind, the hum of air vents all slipping away until there was only his voice. "I should be shut the door," he said quietly. "I didn't, and I can explain why, except I think I heard something. I hadn't heard in a long time. Honesty without an angle. I told myself it was curiosity, but it was more than that. And that as not an excuse. It was wrong." Evie's eyes glistened in the soft light, her hand gripping the cold metal rail. "You heard that conversation?" He nodded once. "Yes." "About waiting. About wanting something real." "I didn't mean to invade your privacy, but I did. And I need you to know I am sorry." For a moment, she just stared at him, unsure whether to be angry or moved. The wind tugged at her hair, at the hem of her coat, but she stayed still. Daniel went on, voice steady but low. "After that day, I did everything I could to make sure my feelings didn't turn into harm. I wrote the policy about oversight. I created distance. I tried to do the right thing even if I'd already failed once." He turned toward her then, his eyes searching hers. "If you ever felt anything more than professional between us, I want you to know you'd never owe me anything. Not your time, not your kindness, not your silence. If there is ever a future where you want something more, I'd step down first. No hesitation. That's a promise." The words landed between them like something fragile, almost sacred. Evie felt her throat tighten. She had braced herself for excuses, for the kind of corporate detachment that turned apologies into strategy. But this was plain, human, unarmored. "You didn't have to tell me," she said softly. "Yes, I did," Daniel replied. "Because it means I saw you before I had the right to. And that it's something I can carry without naming." Her eyes filled again, not with anger, but with something she couldn't quite name: grief, gratitude, maybe both. "That conversation," she said slowly, "it wasn't easy for me to say even to Mara. I felt exposed for a long time after. But hearing you say this now..." She stopped, searching for words. Daniel waited. "It doesn't feel like violation anymore," she said finally. "It feels like being seen honestly, for once, and not used against me." He looked at her then, and the tension that had coiled in his shoulders began to loosen. "You were not angry I was," she admitted, "for about 30 seconds just now. Then I remembered that you're the man who shut the door in that same room months later." A faint smile crossed his face, weary but real. "I suppose I did." They stood there again in quiet, the wind threading through the lights, the lake below a sheet of black glass. "You know," Evie said after a moment, "most people in your position would have hidden it forever." "I've done enough hiding in my life," Daniel murmured, "and none of it made me proud." She nodded, her chest rising slowly. "Thank you for naming it." The way she said it, calm, unflinching, felt like a benediction. Daniel exhaled, shoulders sinking, relief washing through him so quietly he almost didn't recognize it. "Evie," he said softly, "you don't have to decide what any of this means right now. You owe me nothing." "I know," she said, smiling faintly, "but maybe for tonight, you can stop sounding like a legal document." That made him laugh, a small, surprise sound that felt like sunlight cracking through clouds. The wind picked up again, scattering a few paper napkins left on the patio. Evie reached to catch one before it blew away, and for a heartbeat, their fingers brushed. Neither of them moved. Below them, the city kept glittering, unaware of two people learning, at last, how to tell the truth without breaking it. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than the wind. "Daniel," she said, eyes still on the skyline, "maybe tomorrow we can talk about something that isn't an apology." He nodded. "I'd like that." And for the first time in a long time, the silence between them felt not heavy, but full. It started with a ping, then another and another. By 9:12 a. The company Slack was a low hum of private channels and side-eye emojis. By 9:30, the whispers had made it to the elevators, and by 10, someone had printed the email, the anonymous email, and left it folded on the counter in the break room. Subject line: about that promotion. Evie hadn't seen it right away. She was in a project briefing when she noticed people shifting in their seats, avoiding her eyes. When she stepped into the hall, her phone vibrated 3 unread messages from Mara. "Don T, look at your inbox. Too late." The message was already there, sitting in her inbox like a live wire. No signature, no sender name beyond the generic internal announcement bot. It was short, maybe 100 words, but enough to burn transparency matters. While some employees get promotions through long nights and hard work, others seem to find faster routes. Hard to believe HR doesn't notice that Evie Whitman spends late nights alone with the CEO, just saying what everyone else thinking. Evie's breath left her body in a single, soundless exhale. The walls of her office seemed to tilt slightly, her hands cold around the phone. Her first instinct was to delete it, pretend it didn't exist. But then she heard the faint sound of laughter outside her door, quick, nervous, guilty. She opened her computer. Slack notifications poured in, most unrelated, some sharp. "Finance team? Anyone else see that water cooler, spicy morning lull?" General, remember to keep professionalism in public channels. Folks from HR. It didn't matter that HR had already flagged it for investigation. The damage was done. By noon, her manager called her into a small meeting room, expression tight. Evie, I need to let you know Legal S requested to pause all pending personnel actions until this is reviewed. You mean my promotion? She said quietly. He nodded, avoiding her eyes. Just a formality. They need to make sure it's clean. Clean, she repeated. The word tasted bitter. When she stepped out of the room, the hallway felt narrower than usual. Eyes flicked toward her, then away again. Every whisper sounded like her name. She made it to the stairwell before she let herself breathe. The sound that came out wasn't quite a sob, but it hurt just as much. Downstairs. Daniel was in his office when Clara knocked. "Sir, we have an issue," she said, sliding a printed copy of the email across his desk. It traced it. Anonymous account created through a proxy. We re-investigating. Daniel read it once, then again, slower. His jaw tightened with each word. Who's seen this? Everyone, Clara admitted. We've already issued a company-wide statement condemning anonymous slander. But the rumor's moving faster than the facts. Daniel rose from his chair. Where is she? Her department, Clara said carefully. But I'd recommend waiting. He didn't wait. When he reached the 6th floor, the usual hum of the finance team fell silent. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Fingers froze over keyboards. Evie stood at her desk, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the screen. She looked up only when she heard his voice. Evie. It wasn't the CEO voice, not clipped, not formal, just her name, spoken softly, almost like an apology. Come with me, he said. She hesitated, glancing around at the eyes watching them. Daniel, that C not, please. The word carried a weight that silenced the rest of the floor. He led her into the nearest conference room and closed the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city stretched behind the glass, bright and indifferent. Whoever did this, Daniel began, I'll find them, and they'll be gone before the week's out. Evie shook her head. That's not what I need right now. He frowned. Evie, this isn't gossip. It is defamation. I know, she said quietly. But if you jump in, it'll look exactly like what they're accusing us of. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The truth of it landed hard. I need to fight this myself, she continued. If people think you were protecting me, I'll lose every shred of credibility I have left. Let me handle it through HR. Evie. She met his eyes then, steady and unflinching. You've already done enough to protect me. Daniel, let me protect myself this time. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. His throat worked as he swallowed words he wanted to say, that he couldn't stand watching her take this alone, that the urge to defend her felt like oxygen. But she was right. He took a slow breath. All right, he said finally. You will handle it. But if anyone crosses a line again, you call me. I will. He nodded once, the muscle in his jaw tightening. And if you need distance while this clears, I'll respect that. I think it is best, she said softly. For now. Something flickered in his expression. Pain. Maybe pride. Understood. Evie turned toward the door, then paused. Daniel? He looked up. I don't believe it for a second, she said. Whatever they are saying, I know who you are. Her words hit him harder than any accusation could have. He nodded once, unable to speak, and she walked out, head held high. By evening, the storm had grown social media mentions, whispered theories, the usual office vultures feeding on scandal. But Evie didn't hide. She sent a short, factual email to her department. An anonymous message circulated today regarding my professional integrity. It's false. Legal is reviewing the matter. Until then, I ask that you continue focusing on our work. Truth doesn't need defense, it just needs time. No signatures, no dramatics, just calm authority. When Daniel read it from his office, he closed his laptop slowly, the faintest smile breaking through his exhaustion. He'd seen courage in 1,000 forms: business risks, financial gambles, impossible deadlines. But this A woman standing tall in a storm built to break her. This was a different kind of courage, and it made him realize something he hadn't dared name before. Respect was how love looked when it refused to become selfish. Outside, the city lights blurred in the glass, gold against black. Somewhere down the hall, a few people whispered her name again, this time softer, almost uncertain. By midnight, the rumor had started to lose its shine. But Daniel knew the real test was still ahead, not whether she'd survive it, but whether he could keep his promise to stay still while she did. When the board finally cleared her calendar for discussion of advancement, Evie walked into the conference room with her head high, her heart steady. The long glass table reflected the winter light, cold and clean, and a carafe of untouched water sat at the center. The faces around it, legal, HR, operations, looked at her with a mix of politeness and unease. They wanted this to be easy. It wasn't going to be. "Ms. Whitman," began the chairwoman, smoothing the papers before her. "The review of last week's incident is still ongoing. However, given your performance and the prior recommendation for promotion, the committee is inclined to proceed conditionally." Evie folded her hands. "With respect, I'd like to decline until the review is complete." A murmur traveled around the table. "Decline." "Yes," she said, calm and clear. "If there is even a shadow of doubt about how I earned this, I had rather wait than carry it with me. I don't want a title that anyone can question." The room went very still. Clara Jensen, seated near the end, gave the smallest of nods. One of the senior VPs shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That S, admirable, Ms. Whitman, but unnecessary. The board. Evie interrupted gently. "It is necessary for me. No anger, no dramatics, just the truth." There was a long silence before the chairwoman exhaled. "Very well. We'll table the promotion until the audit concludes. Is there anything else you'd like to add?" "Yes," Evie said. "I'd like to request a transfer." "Transfer to the Royce Foundation," she explained. "They are expanding community finance initiatives. My background in analytics could help build the impact reporting models." A flicker of surprise moved through the boardroom. The Royce Foundation was technically part of the same corporate ecosystem, but it was an entirely different branch, smaller, less political, more purpose-driven. Daniel was sitting 2 seats down from the chairwoman, silent until now. "That division doesn't report to me," he said quietly. "I know," Evie replied, meeting his gaze for the first time that morning. "That's why I am asking for it." Something unspoken passed between them, understanding, maybe even relief. The chairwoman glanced toward Daniel. "Mr. Royce, your thoughts?" He leaned back, measured, controlled. "Ms. Whitman's request makes sense. The foundation needs strategic insight. I'll recuse myself from any further discussion or vote." "Noted," the chairwoman said. The vote took less than 5 minutes. Unanimous. When Evie stepped out into the hall afterward, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. She'd walked in with her name hanging under suspicion. She was walking out with it reclaimed, even if the world hadn't noticed yet. 2 weeks later, the company held its quarterly town hall. The auditorium on the first floor buzzed with the usual chatter and caffeine hum. Cameras were set up for the live stream. Every seat was filled. Daniel stood behind the podium, adjusting his notes under the glare of stage lights. The backdrop read, "Royce Technologies 1, Company, 1 Standard." He began as he always did, voice even and professional, running through financial updates, upcoming launches, community partnerships. But then he paused, setting the paper aside. "There is something more important than numbers," he said, "integrity and respect." The room quieted. Ivy heard the rumors, the half-truths, the whispers that can corrode trust faster than any bad quarter. Daniel continued, "We cannot be a company that tolerates that. Not here, not under my name." He let the silence stretch just long enough to hold every pair of eyes in the room. When people are attacked for their character, when privacy is invaded. When rumor replaces fact, it is not just unprofessional, it is cruelty wearing a suit. Evie sat in the back row beside Clara, her pulse steady, but her throat tight. "That ends today," Daniel said. "Effective immediately. The board has approved a new anonymous reporting platform for workplace harassment and ethical violations. Each report will go directly to an independent third party. No one, myself included, will see the content until it has been verified. No retaliation, no cover-ups." He looked out at the faces before him, hundreds of employees, from interns to executives. "And one more thing," he added, his tone softening but no less firm. "When someone stands tall in the face of falsehood, when they choose honesty over comfort, they remind us all who we're supposed to be." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. From the back, Evie watched as a slow ripple of applause began, tentative at first, then stronger. It spread from the rows of analysts and coordinators, the people who stayed late and skipped lunches, the ones who knew what it meant to be unseen. The executives in the front row clapped politely, some not at all, but the rank and file rose to their feet. For once, Daniel didn't stop them. He stepped back from the podium, nodded once, and walked off stage into the wings. Later that afternoon, he found her by the coffee machine in the lobby. She looked different in jeans and a simple gray sweater, instead of her usual business attire, freer. Somehow. "Congratulations," he said quietly. For what she asked, for reminding everyone what courage looks like. Evie smiled faintly. "The foundation accepted my start date for next month." He nodded. "Good. I thought you might want to veto it. I told the board I'd de-recuse myself," he said, "and I meant it." They stood there for a moment, the faint hiss of the espresso machine filling the space between them. "Daniel," she said finally, "I want you to know this wasn't about running away. I know. It's about finding a place where the work feels like it matters again." He nodded slowly. "Maybe we both need that." Their eyes met then, steady and unguarded. For the first time in months, there was no secrecy. No imbalance, just two people on opposite sides of something that might one day become peace. When she turned to go, he said, "Evie." She stopped, looking back. "You didn't lose anything," he said softly. "You just made the rest of us remember what it means to deserve what we have." Her smile was small, almost wistful. Then maybe that's enough. She walked away, her reflection slipping past his in the glass door, her future unfolding quietly beyond it. Daniel watched until the doors closed, the applause from earlier still echoing faintly in his mind. Outside, the winter light had softened, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like the start of something clean. The call came on a Thursday morning. Evie was in the Foundation open workspace, reviewing a data set for the new Small Business Grant Initiative, when her phone buzzed. Clara Jensen. The name alone made her pulse tighten. "Evie," Clara said, voice calm, but weighted. "Do you have a moment to come upstairs?" V identified the source of that email. Evie's breath stilled. "The one from last month." "Yes." The anonymous message. "Forensics finished tracing the origin. I think you will want to hear this in person." Evie's chair creaked softly as she stood. "All right," she said. The elevator ride to the main corporate floor felt longer than usual, the numbers lighting up like beats in a pulse. When she stepped into Clara's office, Daniel was already there, leaning against the window with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes met hers with a kind of quiet gravity that made her heart sink. "Tell me," Evie said. Clara gestured toward a printed report on her desk. "The email originated from your friend Mara Kendall's account. It was sent at 11:42 p.m. MIM, 3 nights before it circulated company-wide." Evie blinked, confusion cutting through the shock. "That's impossible. Mara would never. She is my friend." "I know," Clara said softly, "and for what it is worth. I don't think she meant to." The forensics show multiple login attempts from her workstation after she left the building. Daniel's voice came next. Low and even. Security checked the overnight footage. Around 11:30 that night, Colton Hale entered the sixth-floor offices using his after-hours badge. He wasn't supposed to be there. The name hit like a slap. Colton fired weeks ago, escorted out after the HR incident, now suddenly resurrected in the wreckage he'd left behind. Clara slid a still image across the desk, grainy footage of a tall figure in a tailored coat walking through the cubicle aisles. The timestamp glowed in white at the bottom corner. He accessed several computers. Clara continued, including Mara S. The tech team confirmed her laptop was still logged in. He sent the email using her credentials, then deleted the sent item. She probably didn't even realize it until this morning, when we matched the metadata. Evie sank slowly into the chair across from her. The room seemed to narrow, the edges of sound folding inward. So it was him? She whispered. Yes, Daniel said. But the digital trail led to her. Until now. Clara hesitated. Mara S. waiting in the lounge. She asked to speak with you. Evie S.'s first instinct was to say no to protect what little calm she'd rebuilt. But part of her knew this wasn't about protection anymore. It was about truth. I'll see her, she said quietly. Mara was standing by the coffee machine when Evie walked in. Her usually bright face looked hollow, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes. When she saw Evie, she started to speak, then stopped, her voice cracking on the first syllable. Evie, I swear, I didn't know, she said. I never meant. Evie raised a hand gently. It was okay. Sit down. Mara obeyed, clasping her trembling hands. That night, I stayed late to finish a compliance report. Colton came by around 10, said he forgot something. He asked if I could keep him company while he waited for a driver. I thought he was just being friendly. Her voice broke on the word. I left to grab a soda from the vending machine, Mara continued. 5 minutes. I didn't even lock my computer. He must have used it. She looked up, eyes wet. Evie, I didn't realize anything until I'd called this morning. I thought I was going to be fired, that you'd hate me. I'm so sorry. Evie sat there for a long moment, letting the words settle. The easy response, the angry one, was right there, waiting on her tongue. You should have known. You should have seen who he was. But under the anger was something smaller, truer exhaustion. I believe you, Evie said finally. Mara blinked. You do. You made a mistake, Evie said. A human one. You trusted someone you shouldn't have. Ivy done the same. Mara covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. I ruined your life for a month. No, Evie said softly. He tried to. You just left the door open. That drew a small, broken laugh through Mara's tears. You're still making metaphors when I should be groveling? I am trying not to, Evie said, almost smiling. But you know me. Mara nodded, wiping her eyes. Can you ever forgive me? Evie thought about the word. Forgiveness sounded clean, simple, but what she felt wasn't simple. It was layered pain, pity, understanding, fatigue. Forgiveness would have to live alongside all of it. Yes, she said at last, I can forgive you. But I won't forget. Mara nodded, accepting that for what it was. A boundary, not punishment. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that acknowledged everything words couldn't fix. When Evie finally stood, she placed a hand on Mara's shoulder. Take some time off, she said. Start fresh when you were ready. Mara looked up. You're better than I deserve. Evie shook her head. None of us deserve what he did. Later that evening, Evie stood by the window of her new office at the Royce Foundation. The lake shimmered in the distance, gray and endless. Daniel knocked softly on the frame before stepping inside. You heard, she said. He nodded. I wanted to see if you were all right. I will be, she said. It is strange after all the chaos. I thought I'd feel angry, but mostly I just feel tired. He crossed the room, keeping his distance. That's what honesty costs sometimes. She smiled faintly. You sound like someone who's paid the same price. He didn't deny it. Clara S. forwarding the findings to legal. The case against Colton will hold. Evie looked back out at the lake. Good. Do you want to attend the hearing? She shook her head. No, I don't need to see him again. I just want to live in a world where men like him stop being rewarded for the damage they cause." Daniel nodded, his expression softening. UV already made that world a little smaller for him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights flickered in the reflection, her silhouette beside his, no longer blurred by power or rumor. "Mara S. lucky to have you," Daniel said quietly. Evie exhaled, her gaze still on the horizon. "Maybe we were both lucky," she said, "to still believe people can be better, even after they were not." He nodded once, and in the quiet that followed, something like peace began to take root. The snow had come early that year, dusting the streets in quiet white. From the balcony of her apartment, Evie watched the flakes drift like ash in the streetlight, soft and slow, until the phone buzzed on her counter. "Daniel, there's something I'd like to show you. If you're free tonight, no expectation, no urgency, just an invitation. The kind that waited for yes or no without pressure." Evie stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Yes." He sent an address. Not the tower downtown. Not his office. A quiet street on the north side, near the lake. When she arrived, the snow had thickened into a soft veil. His car was already parked by the curb. Headlights dimmed. He stepped outside as she approached, coat unbuttoned, breath curling in the cold. "Hi," he said, voice almost shy. "Hi," she answered, her smile small but steady. He opened the gate, letting her step into the modest front yard. The house was smaller than she'd imagined, red brick, ivy along the fence. The kind of place that looked lived in, not displayed. A single porch light glowed amber, making the snowflakes shimmer as they fell. Inside, warmth met her immediately. Cedar, faint coffee, the soft hum of a fireplace. There were no grand windows or expensive art here, just shelves lined with books, a framed photograph of a woman laughing near a garden, and in the corner, a piano covered in dust and light. "She was a pianist," Daniel said quietly, following her gaze. "My wife, Julia." Evie nodded. "It's beautiful." "She was," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "I haven't touched it since she died." Evie turned to him. "Why now?" He hesitated, his hands clasped loosely before him. "Because tonight, for the first time in a long while, I don't feel like I am betraying her by remembering." The confession landed softly, like the snow outside, gentle, inevitable. He walked to the piano, brushing a hand across the keys. Dust rose in the light, catching like tiny constellations. Then, without sitting, he pressed one note, just one, middle C. The sound was imperfect, slightly out of tune, but real. Evie moved closer, the warmth of the fireplace brushing her back. "Do you miss her every day?" "Not the way I used to," he said. "Grief changes shape. It used to feel like drowning. Now it's more like walking with a limp. You get used to the imbalance." She nodded. "I understand that." Daniel looked at her, then really looked, and something unguarded passed across his face. "Evie," he said, his voice rough, "I don't know how to do this without hurting you." Her heart caught at the rawness in his tone. "You want," she said. "You can know that." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then we'll name the fear when it shows up, and go slowly." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing her words, then opened them again, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Slowly," he repeated. She nodded. "Slowly." The fire popped once behind them, breaking the silence. He lifted his hand slightly, then stopped midway, giving her time to move if she wanted to. She didn't. Instead, she took the final step forward until the space between them disappeared. Her hand came to rest over his, her palm against the back of his fingers. The contact was small, but it felt like an earthquake under the skin. For a long time, that was enough. Two people standing by a silent piano, the world outside frozen and still. Then he whispered, "Evie." She looked up. He lowered his forehead to hers, breath mingling in the quiet. The moment stretched, trembling between hesitation and need, between what they feared and what they hoped to deserve. "Is this all right?" he asked. She nodded once, barely a breath. Yes. The kiss, when it came, was barely a kiss, more like a promise traced in air. No urgency, no claim, just the slow recognition of something long awaited. His hand rose to her cheek, and she covered it with her own, holding him there. The warmth of his skin, the tremor beneath it, told her what his words never could. He was terrified, and trying anyway. When they finally parted, the world felt quieter, not louder. Her voice was soft but sure. "That is enough for tonight." He smiled faintly. "It's more than I expected." She brushed her thumb across his knuckles. "Good. Then let us stop here before we rush what doesn't need rushing." He nodded, the smallest gesture of agreement, and stepped back. Evie turned toward the piano once more, running her fingers over the keys without pressing them. "Play something for her," she said. Daniel hesitated, then sat down. His fingers hovered, searching memory for sound. When he began, the notes were hesitant at first, then steadier, a melody simple and tender, half forgotten. Evie stood beside him, eyes closed, listening as grief and healing tangled in the music. When the final note faded, neither spoke. He turned to her. "Thank you for not running," he said quietly. She smiled, eyes glistening. "I think I finally stopped needing to." Outside, the snow kept falling soft, unhurried, as if the night itself had decided to move at their pace. 6 months later. Summer had come back to the lake. The wind off the water was warm this time, carrying the faint scent of lilac and salt from the shore. Along the terrace of the Royce Foundation, white tents fluttered gently above linen-draped tables and glass pitchers filled with lemon slices. A string quartet played near the dock, their music rising and falling like breath. Evie stood at the podium in a pale blue dress, her hair swept behind her shoulders. The crowd was larger than she expected: donors, scholars, journalists, and a surprising number of employees who had once called her Ms. Whitman in cautious tones. Tonight, they called her by name. She glanced at the first row where Daniel sat, jacket off, sleeves rolled, an expression of quiet pride that never demanded to be seen. When their eyes met, he gave the smallest nod. Evie smiled, took a breath, and began. "When I joined this foundation, I thought I was walking away from something: the noise, the politics, the constant need to prove my worth. But I realize now, I was walking toward something, toward purpose." The microphone hummed softly as the evening settled around her. "In the months since we began this initiative, I've met brilliant women analysts, engineers, mathematicians who love their work but live in fear of being silenced or dismissed. Fear shouldn't be a condition of employment. Dignity should not depend on hierarchy." A murmur of agreement moved through the audience. The string quartet paused, the lake lapping quietly against the wooden dock. That's why, starting this fall, the Royce Foundation will launch a national grant to fund Safe Work Labs programs that create secure and equitable workplaces for women in STEM analytics. Each grant will include legal support, mentorship, and mental health resources for those who've been marginalized or mistreated, because courage shouldn't have to stand alone. She paused then, eyes scanning the crowd, the faces of young researchers, seasoned executives, women clutching notebooks like lifelines. "This is not about me," she said softly. "It's about what happens when we refuse to shrink." The applause that followed was not thunderous, but deep, a sound that filled the air like a heartbeat, steady and sure. From his seat near the back, Daniel clapped quietly, his gaze never leaving her. He could have spoken that night he had been asked to, in fact, but he declined. This was her stage, her victory. He had built companies. She had built meaning. After the speeches and photos, the crowd began to drift toward the lakeside path, where lanterns glowed along the water's edge. The band played something gentle old jazz, slow enough for conversation. Evie slipped off her heels and carried them in one hand. her bare feet cool against the flagstones. The lake glittered like a sheet of silver beneath the moon. She didn't notice Daniel following until his shadow fell beside hers. "You disappeared," he said softly. "Just taking a moment? You earned it." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the murmur of waves and the laughter drifting from the terrace behind them. When they reached the small garden tucked behind the boathouse, a half-forgotten place edged with lavender and stone benches, Daniel stopped. "Evie." She turned, and her breath caught. He looked nervous. That alone made her smile. "You okay?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, unadorned box. "I've been thinking about this for months," he said, "and I promised myself I wouldn't do it on stage or in front of cameras. I just wanted you to hear it first." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. No diamonds, no grandeur. A single band of gold with a tiny engraving on the inside worth the wait. Evie's eyes stung instantly. "I don't need a spectacle," Daniel said quietly. "I just need truth. You changed the way I lead, the way I listen, the way I hope. I don't want to own your story. I want to stand next to it if you'll let me." Her throat tightened. "Daniel, I am not promising perfection," I went on. "Just presence. And I know what it costs to trust me after what we both lived through. So, I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." The ring caught the lantern light, flickering gold. Evie took a long breath, her voice trembling with something between laughter and tears. "That's quite a vow. It's not the full one," he said, "but it has a start." She stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Then here is mine," she whispered. "I am not marrying a CEO. I am marrying a man who knows how to listen and who let me speak." He smiled, eyes bright. "Is that a yes?" It's the easiest yes Ivy ever said." He slipped the ring onto her finger not as possession, but as promise. And when he kissed her, it wasn't the tentative brush of that first night. It was certain, grounded, filled with the joy of two people who had waited, healed, and finally arrived. The wind off the lake lifted her hair, the scent of lavender mingling with salt. "Worth the wait," she murmured against his shoulder. He smiled, every second. From the terrace behind them came another swell of music, a soft waltz drifting over the water. Daniel offered his hand. "Dance with me." Evie laughed through her tears. Here's perfect, barefoot in the garden. They moved together beneath the lanterns, slow and steady, like people who finally understood time was not their enemy. And somewhere between the waves and the music, Evie realized that love, at its truest, wasn't about being rescued. It was about arriving whole, seen, and unafraid exactly when you were ready. Every Saturday at 7:30, they walked the same path, a mile along the lake, from the old pier to the coffee stand with the chipped blue sign. The air was cool even in summer, laced with the scent of water and the sweetness of the early morning bakery 2 blocks away. Daniel always carried his travel mug. Evie always brought the cinnamon pastries she claimed were for both of us, though she never finished one. They didn't talk much during those walks. They didn't need to. The sound of the water, the rhythm of their footsteps, the gulls calling overhead, that was conversation enough. After the wedding, after the articles and the congratulations and the endless well-wishers, life had become something gentler, quieter. Their townhouse sat near the edge of the city, close enough to hear the trains at night, but far enough for the stars to peek through. Inside, the kitchen window faced east. That S where the sunlight first touched, where the frame page from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn hung above the breakfast table. It wasn't the whole book, just one page, the passage about the tree that grew from concrete, stubborn and alive. Underneath, in faint pencil, Daniel had written, "For the faithful heart." Evie had found it waiting for her on the morning of their first anniversary, framed and hung without a word. Sometimes she caught him looking at it while pouring coffee, and every time he'd give her that small half smile, the one that said, "I still mean it." Across from the window, another odd decoration hung near the bookshelf, an old, dented door, closer mounted on a plaque of oak. The metal gleamed faintly under the light, polished and precise. It was the same one from the CAF conference room, the door through which he had first overheard her confession years ago. Daniel had repaired it himself, tightening the screws until it closed perfectly. No gaps, no sound. Then he'd taken it down before the CAF remodeled and brought it home. Evie had laughed when he showed her. "You turned our beginning into wall art." He'd shrugged. "I wanted a reminder of the first time I learned what happens when I don't listen properly." Now, whenever guests asked what it was, Evie would say, "It's a story about a door that was open just enough for a heart to change." That Saturday morning, the light was silver on the lake, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Evie was dressed in a soft gray sweater, her hair tucked beneath a wool cap. Daniel wore his old navy jacket, the one with the worn elbows she refused to let him throw away. When they reached the end of the pier, they stopped, as they always did. The city stretched behind them, the water ahead looked endless. "Ready for next week?" Daniel asked, eyes on the horizon. Evie smiled. "You mean the internship launch?" He nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said. "We've got 22 new fellows this year, all young, brilliant, terrified in their own ways." He chuckled. "Sounds familiar." She nudged his arm. "Hey, you weren't terrified." "Oh, I was," he said, "just good at hiding it." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from people who've survived too much to take peace for granted. Later that morning, back at the foundation, Evie walked into the new mentorship wing, a glass-walled space filled with sunlight and whiteboards covered in equations, sketches, and quotes. The plaque by the entrance read, "The Listening Room." Daniel had chosen the name, she later learned. Inside, a group of interns gathered around coffee cups and laptops, buzzing with the energy of people who still believed everything was possible. Evie spotted one girl sitting off to the side, a quiet one with auburn hair pulled into a loose braid. The name tag read, Lena Ortiz, data intern. Evie approached gently. "Mind if I sit?" The girl shook her head. "No, Ma am." "You don't have to call me Ma am," Evie said, smiling. "Evie, S fine." Lena hesitated, then looked up. "I just wanted to say, I really liked your talk last month, the one about resilience. The way you said silence isn't a weakness." Evie tilted her head. "That part," Lena nodded. I related to it. I am 22. Never really dated. Never been with anyone. My friends think it is weird." The words came out rushed, almost whispered. Evie felt her heart catch, the years folding back in a single moment that afternoon at the CAF, the trembling confession, the fear of being too late. She smiled softly. "It is not weird, Lena. It is brave." The girl frowned, uncertain. "Brave?" "Yes," Evie said, "because it means you know what you're waiting for, and it means you still believe it is out there." Lena S. shoulders eased a little. "Sometimes I wonder if I've missed my chance." Evie reached over, touching her hand lightly. "You haven't. You get to choose when and how your story begins. And you were not late." Lena S. eyes glistened, the kind of gratitude that comes from being seen. "Thank you," she whispered. Evie smiled. "Anytime." As she stood to leave, she glanced toward the hallway window, where Daniel was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. He raised one as a silent toast. She lifted her hand in return. Through the glass, sunlight caught the gold band on her finger. That evening, back at home, Daniel was at the piano again, Julia S. piano, now tuned and bright. He wasn't a great player, but that never mattered. His hands moved with the ease of a man who'd finally made peace with his ghosts. Evie leaned against the doorway, watching him. Still practicing, she asked. He smiled without looking up. Still learning? She crossed the room, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We both are." Outside, the rain began light, steady, like the world exhaling. Daniel stopped playing and looked up at her. "Tomorrow is our walk." She nodded. 7:30. He grinned. "Wouldn't miss it." Evie bent down, kissed his temple, and whispered, You fixed the door. I guess I'll keep the rest open." He laughed softly, pulling her close, and in the small, quiet house by the lake with the piano, the framed page, and the mended door, the only sound that remained was the gentle rhythm of two people who had finally learned to listen, together. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, through the cracks we once tried so hard to hide. Evie thought her silence made her small, that waiting made her weak. Daniel believed love was a luxury meant for other people, not men who'd already lost too much. But somehow, in the quiet spaces between them, in the pauses, the patience, the courage to speak honestly, they found what neither success nor time could give: peace. We spend so much of life trying to prove our worth, to rush toward the next thing, to fix what was never broken. Yet love, the kind that lasts, often finds us when we finally stop running. Maybe that as the real miracle, not being chosen first, but being seen fully, not perfection, but presence. Not the noise of romance, but the stillness of two hearts learning to listen again. And when it happens, it doesn't roar, it whispers. It sounds like the soft click of a door finally closing, right after years of being just a little open. Thank you for being here with us. Every moment you spend listening, every tear, every quiet smile, it all matters. It means the world to know that somewhere out there, these stories still find a home in your heart. If this story touched you, please remember every like, every share, every subscribe helps us bring more light into the world, one human story at a time. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep believing in the quiet kind of love, the kind that listens.